I need to tell you something about Cleveland, and I need you to actually sit with it for a second before your brain starts filing it under another quarterback controversy. Because what's happening inside that building right now is not a controversy. It's a reckoning. 3 days of OT has just wrapped up, and I've been parked in front of every clip, every field report, every carefully choreographed press release, and every suspiciously vague non-answer that came out of that coaching staff, and I'm sitting here genuinely unsettled. Not because things look bad, because things look complicated in a way that demands honesty, and honesty is not always the easiest product to move in this business. So let me just talk to you straight. Shedeur Sanders walked into Cleveland carrying a mountain of noise, arm strength debates, velocity critiques, guys pulling up Colorado tape and acting like they'd personally lined up across from him and measured ball spin in real time. I heard all of it. I let it sit. And now I've watched every rep I could physically access from these 3 OTA sessions, and I'm going to tell you what I actually see rather than what the algorithm wants me to confirm. This kid throws with touch. And I don't mean that as a compliment wrapped in a caveat. I mean it as a statement of genuine football rarity. Real touch. The kind that arrives. The kind that a receiver doesn't have to adjust his body to accommodate on a crossing route at speed. The kind that drops into the bucket on time, at the right angle, in the precise window that only the intended man can access. That is not something you coach into someone. You can refine it. You can scheme around the absence of it. But you cannot install it from scratch, and Shedeur Sanders walked into the Cleveland Browns facility with it already loaded into his operating system. There was a throw to Carson Ryan, the rookie tight end out of BYU, that I must have rewound 4 or 5 times. Nothing about it would make a highlight reel. No crowd noise, no dramatic catch, no big moment attached to it. Just a perfectly weighted, perfectly timed professional throw that communicated something essential to me about how this 22-year-old understands what a football player actually needs in a given moment. Not what the play diagram drew up, not what the coordinator scripted, what that man, right there, right now, in that exact position on that exact route, needed the ball to do. That separation between players who can produce circus moments and players who can consistently win you real games in real weather with real stakes on the line, that throw lived right in that gap. And I need to talk about the chemistry, because this is where my attention really locked in. Early spring installation is supposed to be messy. You're building vocabulary from scratch with people who barely know each other's tendencies. The connections that form organically in these early sessions, before the full playbook is open, before reps have created muscle memory, those connections tell you something true. And what I kept watching develop over and over, naturally, not because a coordinator scripted it, but because a quarterback was feeling the rhythm of a real offense, was Shedeur to Tylan Wallace and Shedeur to Carson Ryan. 2 completely different players, 2 different areas of the field, 2 different skill profiles, and he found both of them repeatedly in ways that didn't look like execution. They looked like instinct. That's feel. You don't manufacture that in 72 hours. Now here's the wrinkle that makes all of this even more meaningful. Harold Fannin wasn't out there. The tight end that Shedeur built a genuine 2-man connection with last season, the guy who made that offense genuinely difficult to scheme against, was not on the field for these reps. And Shedeur was still generating real, organic, visible chemistry with players he barely knows yet. When your most trusted weapon is unavailable and your quarterback is still operating the offense with authority rather than just surviving the install period, that tells me more than any individual throw can. That's a quarterback who doesn't need perfect conditions to function. That's a quarterback who finds ways. There was also this small moment involving Justin Jefferson, the rookie linebacker out of Alabama, that I keep coming back to, because these are exactly the kinds of details that vanish inside bigger storylines, but carry the most actual weight. Day 1, Jefferson gets his hand in on Carson Ryan during a route, tugs the jersey, disrupts the timing, kills the play. Nothing dramatic happens. No sideline explosion, no visible frustration. Day 2, same route, same matchup. Ryan comes down with the football. No fanfare, no celebration. Just a problem that existed on Tuesday, quietly solved on Wednesday. That's a quarterback and a receiver compressing the learning curve under actual competitive pressure. That's accelerated trust being built in real time. Most people watching this spring session will never notice that moment. I can't stop thinking about it. Now I have to go somewhere harder. And I want to be clear. I'm not going to let prior narrative write my analysis for me. I watch what's in front of me, and I report what I actually see. What I see from Deshaun Watson in these OTAs is a quarterback throwing the football well. Genuinely well. The mechanics look clean, the release looks healthy, and his body is doing things I honestly did not expect to see given the road this man has been down. Here's the thing about watching a quarterback come back from serious injury. And we're talking about a man who has now torn both Achilles, which is a sentence I still struggle to process as a football reality. The first thing you look for has nothing to do with arm talent. You're looking for the body protecting itself, the hesitation that happens below conscious thought, a back foot that plants half an inch short, a follow-through that pulls just slightly at the end, a release that comes a beat early because some deep part of the nervous system is still negotiating with rebuilt tissue. I watched Watson closely for all of that. I am not seeing it. When he steps into a throw right now, he steps into it like a man who has finished his private conversation with doubt and is now just throwing the football. The weight transfers completely. The follow-through extends. That is significant information. The deep ball to Jamari Thrash was the kind of throw that would turn heads on any practice field in May. And Thrash is a better receiver than his reputation gives him credit for, a guy with genuine instincts for tracking the ball in the air over his shoulder. Watson put that throw exactly where it needed to be. But the crossbody delivery to Isaiah Bond? That's the one that really got me. A throw away from the frame, across the body, with velocity and accurate placement. That requires full shoulder health, full rotational confidence, full physical trust in the mechanics. You cannot fake that throw. A quarterback quietly protecting his body does not make that delivery look casual. Watson made it look routine. So here's the honest statement. Deshaun Watson in a controlled, clean environment, no live rush, helmets and shorts, mid-May, he looks like a capable NFL quarterback. And I said months ago that Watson might be better at performing in this specific setting than almost anyone in the league, and that is still true. He has lived through more spring installations than most quarterbacks ever will. He spent an entire year on the sideline doing nothing but healing, studying, and mentally preparing for exactly this moment. Of course he looks sharp right now. I expected it. I built that expectation months ago. But the Watson conversation cannot only live in clean conditions, and anyone who lets it stay there is doing something dishonest. We are talking about a 30-year-old quarterback who has appeared in fewer than a third of his team's games since the league expanded to 17. $33 million per year, fully guaranteed, and he has been available for less than a third of the Sundays that contract was meant to cover. Shoulder reconstruction, 2 Achilles tears, physical setbacks stretching back further than most people want to trace. At some point, and I say this without hostility, just with clear eyes, this stops reading as misfortune and starts reading as pattern. Jimmy Haslam is not a man who absorbs that financial weight without eventually demanding something real in return. The pressure on Watson isn't just to throw the ball well in May, it's to exist on a football field in October when the standings mean something and the margin for error has disappeared. And then there's the other dimension of this story, the one I'm not going to skip past because it makes segments of the audience uncomfortable. The civil settlements with multiple women who brought serious allegations against him, a criminal process that didn't produce charges, settlements that were nonetheless reached, agreements that were nonetheless made. Whatever your personal position on the complexity of that situation, however you interpret what it means or doesn't mean, it does not simply stop existing because he threw a beautiful deep ball in practice. It follows him into every facility, every press conference, every snap under center. I've watched this man play football since before most of his current teammates were old enough to watch the NFL with real comprehension. I know what he is capable of doing with a football in his hands. I can hold both of those truths simultaneously. He is extraordinarily talented, and he carries a weight attached to his name that no completion percentage is going to lift. When sections of a fan base visibly celebrated his Achilles injuries, that wasn't sports frustration expressing itself badly. That was something darker, something with deeper roots. And that is the emotional atmosphere this man is stepping back into every single morning he walks into that facility. But here's what complicates my reading of him, and I want to be straight about this. Maybe that weight has done something different to him internally. Maybe a full year of sitting, watching other people play his game, unable to contribute, nothing to do but heal and think and confront himself. Maybe something shifted. Because there's a mental quality to what I'm watching from Watson in these OTAs that I didn't necessarily expect. A stillness. Like a man who had a long, private, difficult conversation with himself somewhere in that recovery, found some kind of resolution, and is now just going to work quietly. That's not easy to perform across multiple practice sessions with real defenders in front of you. Performance has tells, real resolve doesn't. The media narrative is starting to settle on Watson having the lead. I want to address that directly and carefully. A lead in May, in a setting without live pass rushers, without pads, without the kind of fourth-quarter pressure that reveals the true architecture of a quarterback's composure, is a data point. It has always been a data point, and treating it as something larger than that requires either a serious lack of historical context or a conclusion that was reached before the evidence was collected. Because what the actual competitive record shows about Deshaun Watson when real pressure arrives, when the pocket collapses and the rush comes free and he has to hold the ball and trust his body and deliver into a tight window while contact is incoming, is a recognizable pattern. Not an absolute, not without exceptions, but identifiable enough to be real. The feet getting active before the contact even materializes. The movement triggered by a threat that the body hasn't fully accepted yet. That is a mental scar from injury, not a technique problem. And the question these OTAs cannot answer is whether that scar has closed enough to stay buried when a 300-pound edge rusher is coming off the blind side in late October, with playoff implications hanging over the whole thing. Shedeur Sanders does not carry that scar. He is 22 years old, and when he walks to the huddle, the freshness in that confidence is visible even through practice footage. This is not a kid who is nervous about his environment, and the coaching staff has acknowledged as much publicly. And this is a coaching staff that is not in the business of handing out affirmations as a courtesy. Todd Moneen is not Kevin Stefanski. Moneen is not going to keep the temperature comfortable to protect feelings. This is a coach who will call things embarrassing when they're embarrassing and get louder when the execution doesn't match the standard. That's what this roster may have genuinely needed, a voice that refuses to let comfortable mediocrity settle in. And Shedeur is operating inside that demanding environment with a composure that isn't performance. It's just who he actually is in a football context. Mary Kay Cabot was saying last year that Shedeur's pre-snap processing wasn't ready for NFL-level complexity. She came out of day 3 of these OTAs with a noticeably different tone, said the quarterbacks were doing well in the install process, said things looked efficient. That shift doesn't come from a reporter deciding to be generous. It comes from something on the field earning a different observation. Now let me say something about the interceptions, because the internet ran with them the way the internet always does and tried to turn them into character evidence. The picks we've seen across these 3 days have been genuinely strange. Deflections, tipped balls, multi-contact physics chaos that tells you absolutely nothing meaningful about a quarterback's decision-making or judgment. They are noise, actual noise. But the reaction to the interceptions is not noise. And that's the thing I want you to notice. When Shedeur threw one, it was everywhere within minutes. Clipped, posted, analyzed, amplified across every platform. When Watson threw an interception, people in the fan base were literally conducting forensic analysis on practice footage, cross-referencing the color of shorts different quarterbacks were wearing in different clips just to establish basic attribution. Think about what that behavior is actually telling you. It tells you that a portion of the audience has correctly understood that the content being released is curated. Every NFL media operation makes deliberate editorial choices. None of this is unique to Cleveland, but it does mean that what's going on social media and what's being observed by journalists physically standing on the field with grass on their shoes, watching every single rep, those are two different data streams, and they do not always point in the same direction. Zach Jackson, Mary Kay Cabot, the reporters who are present for all of it, not just the highlight-worthy moments, their collective impression carries more signal than any official content package, and their collective impression is not the one-sided story the social media output suggests. Shedeur did not have rough days. He found new connections, operated the offense cleanly across full sessions, showed the complete range of his delivery, and handled everything with a steadiness that doesn't come from someone who feels out of place or outmatched by his environment. Watson had the most visually arresting individual moments: the deep shot, the crossbody throw, the plays that looked like a quarterback performing at peak capacity. But he also had a near interception and a miss that wasn't in the same zip code as its intended target. 3 days of OTAs don't resolve anything. They never have. But what accumulates across those days, the patterns forming, the connections being built, the problems getting solved one session after they appear, that's real signal, and I've been reading it carefully. What I see is Shedeur Sanders building something inside this offense that doesn't require perfect conditions to function. Something that isn't waiting on a medical clearance. Something that isn't sitting on top of a rebuilt Achilles and hoping the foundation holds when the weight finally gets applied for real. He is constructing a foundation, connection by connection, rep by rep, small adjustment by small adjustment, and the people around him can feel it taking shape. 1 week of this spring session remains, 3 more practice days, and every single rep from here into training camp, and every training camp snap into preseason, and every preseason moment into the actual season, all of it is compressing toward the hardest decision this front office has faced in years, maybe longer. Because the real question sitting in the middle of that facility right now isn't which quarterback looked better in May. The real question is what kind of franchise Cleveland actually wants to be. Whether the people in that building are going to make the decision that matches what their eyes are genuinely telling them, or the decision that feels institutionally safer because it was made for them 3 years ago by a contract that was constructed around something entirely different from winning football games. That question doesn't have an easy answer, but it is sitting right there in the middle of that practice field, and everybody inside those walls already knows it.